to create a podcast session, Kevin Melchor.
Thank you so much, Mark, and hello, fellow Toastmasters and wonderful guests. I am really excited to be here this evening because that is right. I'll be sharing with you how to create a podcast. And it's going to be really interesting for me because this is not my first time doing this presentation. This is my second time doing this presentation. Chris has seen this presentation or has seen a variation of this presentation before. So he knows what to expect. But for those who have not seen it, this is going to be your chance to experience. I'm going to take you into the process of what it takes to create a podcast. Obviously, for myself, I have created podcasts. I am a podcast host and producer, and I've been doing it for 10 years now, a little over 10 years. And I'll be happy to share with you my experience for beginners, intermediates, and advanced. And it's okay if you don't want to host or produce a podcast, or you just want to listen, that's perfectly fine. That's what we're here. We're here to learn. And on top of that, I am elated to do this. So here we go. And the first thing I want to share with you is what we're going to be covering. We're going to be covering the beginner level of creating a podcast. That's the first thing we're also going to talk about. The second thing we're going to talk about is intermediate level of podcasting. The next thing we're also going to talk about after intermediate is advanced level of podcasting. So we're going to go through 3 levels of podcasting, and you're going to see that throughout the presentation, how I'm going to do that, how it's going to be a process. So it's like learning how to ride a bike or learning how to drive. We're also going to do a listen-in session to a couple of my podcast episodes that I have done in the past. We're also going to talk about the legal aspect of creating a podcast. Well, I'm also going to give you tips to create a podcast. And lastly, I do have an announcement to share, and that will be it's a podcast announcement, and I'll share with you at the end, towards the end of this presentation. So let's start with the beginner level of creating a podcast. Before I get to the main question, actually, let me ask somebody here who may have experience. Chris, are you there? If not, I'm going to go to Mark. Mark, do you know what a podcast is?
I believe a podcast is when somebody creates a subject, they talk about the subject, and then they post it online. But my knowledge is very limited.
Sandy, do you know what a podcast is?
I think it's just audio only.
You're correct. Chris, do you know what a podcast is? Would you like to share what that is?
Yeah, podcast it can be a combination of an interview or a single person speaking. And it is somewhat like a audio newspaper.
Perfect. Thank you. All of you are correct. There's no real wrong answer to this. What is a podcast? A podcast is a program made available in a digital format for download over the internet. Let me rephrase this question. Why do people listen to podcasts? People listen to podcasts because they want to learn from experts and others who share their interests. The other reason why people listen to podcasts is they connect with communities and connect with emotions. They also listen. The reason why people listen to a podcast is stimulation. They stimulate their imagination, and attention. Another reason is gain inspiration and peace for their own lives. Keep updated and about topics of personal interest. And lastly, they just want to fill empty time or as change from music, because you can hear Prince, you could hear the Beatles. For me, when I drive home on a long 2-hour drive or a 6-hour drive to San Francisco, all I listen to besides music is a podcast, because it's always fun. It's entertaining. It's informative. That's why people listen. What is a podcaster? The podcaster is the person or the individual that is the host and producer or host of the podcast show that they're part of, that they're hosting or producing. So, for instance, Joe Rogan, he's a podcaster. Oprah Winfrey, she's a podcaster. LeVar Burton, he's a podcaster. Myself is a podcaster. All four of us are podcasters because we each have a podcast show that we have currently airing or distributed on a podcast platform, whether it's SiriusXM or Spotify or Apple iTunes Music or Apple Podcasts. So here's the real question. Why be a podcaster and podcast your own show? There is no better time than today to create a voice on the digital public platform on topics you want to. And the reason why I say that is because why podcast and podcast your own show, you want to create that reach. That reach is pretty much your audience. You want to connect with your audience. You want to reach to them. All of us want to talk about Toastmasters, or they want to talk about politics, or they want to talk about things that are going on in life. You want to connect with your audience by reaching to them. The only reason why you want to be a podcaster or even have your own show is to build a rapport or build a community or build a connection. Again, reach and build. Communicate. You want to communicate. There's a lot of people, like Chris. Chris has a voice. I'm pretty sure he's eager to have his own show and talk about politics. I'm pretty sure, Sandy, you want to talk about Toastmasters every day. And Mark, you want to talk about a lot of things that is going on with your work. Why not put it on a podcast and communicate? It's almost like venting to your psychiatrist, except you're venting to the whole world. The other one is express. You want to express your emotion. And that's why people have their own podcast, is because for myself, I started my own podcast because I felt like people needed to know the how-tos, the what-tos about travel. I wanted to create that reach. I wanted to build an audience, build a community around it, communicate to that community, or even those that are not part of the community. I also wanted to express my excitement to everybody. That's why starting my own podcast, and I encourage everybody who's looking to start their own podcast, you should be elated to start one. And on top of that, enjoy, have fun. It's always fun to be either a guest host or a host of your own, having your own show. Just imagine having your own show where either 50 people or 10 people or even thousands of people listening to you, and just either one platform or two platforms. The sky's the limit, and why you should be a podcaster. So back to getting on track. So that's the beginning part. So as a beginner, you'll want to know, I gave you the meat of why you should be a podcaster. And that's pretty much the beginning part. You're a beginner. The next is intermediate level of creating a podcast. I'm going to be sharing with you my process and tools for podcasting. And these are, I would say, 1, 2, 3, 4 things I want to share with you, which is researching, scripting, and recording and tools. So now that you've created, now you have an idea of what a podcast is, or what a podcaster is, or what it means. What does it mean to be a podcaster? Now let's get into the part where the nitty gritty, which is the intermediate part, which is researching, scripting, recording, and tools. So let me stop my PowerPoint here. And to give you an idea, when you have your own podcast, or when you create your own podcast, you want to start by researching. You want to research the topics. You want to research the subject matter. How do you want to create your podcast, or what is your podcast? What is your show? What is your platform you want to talk about? Let me ask Chris. Chris, if I asked you to start your own podcast, what is that podcast that you want to do?
Well, I've actually thought about it, especially since your presentation in university, but I would like to start one talking about what's happening in my city.
And that takes research to put in all the content, right? The meat of it. When you start your own podcast, you want to do a lot of research. You may have heard a lot about news, and where you may have heard fake news or fake information. The reason why you hear that particular term is because there are not a lot of reporters or podcasters or radio hosts. They don't have the time to research their content. As a podcaster, as a host or a producer, you have to do the work. You have to research the topics. For me, as a travel podcast host and producer, I have to research the content. I have to book clients, or actually, book those who want to be interviewed. And that takes research. That research takes about, normally, I would say, a few days to a week or longer, depending on how much work you want to put into doing that research and podcasting. And that's the one thing. And the part of that is I want to share with you, as you can see, how much work I put in to when it comes to research. Researching and scripting come hand to hand, because when I do my shows, I actually do my research. I do my homework. And I also script. As you can see in the screen right now, can you actually see let me ask everybody, can you see the Word documents? Okay. When I do like interviews, I gather up a lot of information that is, for instance, this season 4, episode 33, CES 2023 recap. I did the research because I was at Consumer Electronics Show. I went there, I did my homework. I attended a lot of the workshops that they did. And I also got to meet with a lot of the people who were at CES. And by taking all of that information, I had to turn it into a script. Like, your script is pretty much your agenda, or what you're going to say, or how you're going to organize your show or your episode. So as you see, like, hello, Boston, that I pretty much have everything organized from the tooth and nail of how a show should be or how it should look like before it actually goes to recording. So research and scripting. I suggest researching and scripting because once you put all your ideas and your thoughts, you'll have the ability to know what you're talking about. You'll feel more organized. Sometimes podcasters go off the script and it's basically impromptu. Podcasters like to do impromptu speaking. Here in Toastmasters, we do impromptu speaking, right? Same thing in podcasting. You do a lot of impromptu speaking. In Toastmasters, we do prepared speeches. Here on podcasting, we do our script is our preparation to speak. So this takes a lot of work to put together. And normally when you get to like a more experienced and well-known podcaster, this is where yourself cannot be the producer and you hire a producer and you hire an agent. So we're going to get to that in a little bit, but this is already, your producer organizes this or you organize this if you're a one-man show. So this is the scripting. This is all done by research and scripting. And how I research is you can research by going on the internet. Like you can research topics that people talk about in your community or in Toastmasters. Everybody has a voice. When you have a voice, you want to, for instance, I'll give you an example, like the business meeting that we had a few weeks ago. You could talk about we also had TLI, Toastmasters Leadership Institute. If you're looking to start a Toastmasters podcast show, you could talk about what was going on with at Toastmasters Leadership Institute and things that were uncovered at Toastmasters Leadership Institute. You could expand it and share it on a podcast. You could there's two variations I forgot to mention. There's two variations of podcasting. There's video podcasting and audio podcasting. I myself do audio versus video, but video podcasting is when you do podcasting through video. It's similar to audio, but you have the best of both worlds. If you don't want to show your face on camera, you can do audio. So obviously you want to research and script. This is my process that I wanted to share with you as well. The next thing I want to share with you is recording and tools. As a podcaster, as an intermediate podcaster, and it's almost to the point where you're advanced podcaster. To create a podcast, you have to record, right? And you have to have the tools. The tools I normally use as a podcaster is Adobe Audition. I normally use Adobe Audition. This is what my workspace looks like when I record. And when I record, obviously it's broken down to segments. This is the more advanced or intermediate way of putting together a show. Obviously, you're going to record. I did recordings up here, and this is what a recording, I'm going to have you guys listen to what that looks like from a recording aspect. So let me share with you what podcasting is. I'm going to also share with you the tools, like the equipment and everything, but I wanted to share with you the behind the scenes. I'm giving you the behind the scenes look of how I produce my shows. This is a raw audio footage raw audio file before it is edited on the editing floor.
Good morning and good afternoon, and welcome to another Melchor Jets Dream Vacations MJTV travel podcast. I'm Kevin Melchor, and we have a wonderful show for you, and we're going to be talking about me. the travel advisor.
So you record the content you record your content in segments. That's what I normally do. And taking that recording, and this is what it comes out to be when it comes to be a full on show.
Good morning and good afternoon, and welcome to another Melchor Jets Dream Vacations and JTV travel podcast.
So I added music. I added my recording that I did through the segments. And obviously, this recording takes, I would say, over about 38 minutes. Some of my shows go about an hour or an hour and a half. If people love to talk, I love to talk. If your show or your recording goes over, or an episode goes over an hour, that's perfectly fine. And if you feel like it's going 2 hours, you could cut it and break it. I normally do this. I normally use Adobe Audition to do the more professional aspect of podcasting. The other part, I expanded into Spotify, very own Anchor. It's known as Podcasters by Spotify. And when I put together an episode, I'll share that with you right now. I normally upload it to the editing software here on Anchor or Podcasters. And I just build the show out that way, put in all the transitionals and transitional music and transitional conversations, anything that is going to make the show entertaining. So after you record, you want to put together the show by editing. And this is one of the tools I normally use. The tools I normally use is Adobe Audition for recording, and I use Spotify's Podcaster, which is formerly known as Anchor, to put together the show. In my early days, like I said, I used Adobe Audition. Now, because the software is hands-on, I could easily put together the show without going through all the advanced areas of what Adobe Audition does. And I would say professional podcasters, they go through Adobe Audition just like I do. However, thanks to the advent of podcasters, I'm able to put together a show hands-on and put some music in there that is normally copyright. Because I am subscribed with Spotify, you're able to use licensed music, and it has to get approved by Spotify for you to use it. So it's it's almost like using licensed music to become royalty-free music. So you're able to do that. So when you're a member of Spotify and Podcasters, you automatically have a library to go through when it comes to music, and you'll be able to do that. So that's one of the tools I normally use. The next thing I want to talk about, I did talk about platform and editing, advanced level of creating a podcast. Let's go to, before I get to advanced level of podcasting, the tools. I want to share with you the tools, the equipment, the nitty gritty of it. As a podcaster, you're going to need a really good microphone. And it's normally a condenser microphone. You can go on Amazon, and Amazon normally has you can see how much it is on Amazon here, how to have your when it comes to podcast equipment. It's relatively cheap. Some can go as low as $30. Some can go as hundreds of dollars. If you're at a normal podcast studio, professional studio, and Chris knows this, they have like the full elaborate, like the soundboard, the the high level condenser mics, the headphones. That's studio quality. But if you're doing this at your home, you could actually pull it off for less than $30 just by creating your own show. The investment on equipment is relatively low, or you can make it go high depending on how well you do when it comes to hosting and creating your own show as a podcaster. Another one is you could have lavalier mics as well, so that when you're outdoors, when you do outdoor interviews, this is what I recommend when it comes to, for instance, like TLI. I'll use it if I was doing a podcast that's Toastmasters, and I'm on the field with TLI, or Toastmasters Leadership Institute. I will want to interview or speak with, I don't know, like Sandy or Mark. If you're there in person, I would interview you and put a lavalier mic and get like a one-on-one with you. So that's another tool for those who cannot. Oh, there was one thing I want to share with you, and that is Audition. Adobe Audition, you do need to subscribe. You could either pay for the year-long subscription or a monthly subscription, depending on what your budget is. Normally, the normal standard Adobe Audition Creative Cloud subscription is $60 a month. So times that by 12, there you go. But it's worth an investment. Let's say you don't have the money to do that, or the capital or the funds to do that. It's okay. When I first started over 10 years ago, I used this, Audacity. This was my first real podcast recording tool when it came to podcasting, and that was Audacity. I started with this as a first year or first month podcaster. I used Audacity. I was a beginner and I didn't know what podcasting was. And I didn't have the money to use or to purchase or subscribe to Adobe Audition compared to now, which I do have the funds and the capital to do so. But if you don't have the capital or the funds to do so, you can invest in a free software code called Audacity. You could also record your show as a subscriber with Anchor. It's free. And you could also record your show or do your recording on Spotify Podcasters. So there is a way you can do recording, and I'll share that with you right now. Where it says record, you can record. All you have to do is just have a microphone. You may have seen podcasters where they have like headphones or earbuds. That's perfectly fine as long as it's connected to your audio unit. Now let's get into the advanced level of creating a podcast. So the marketing and promotion, this is a big one, because once you've created your show or have an idea of what your show is, you've created your podcast show, what are you going to do? You're going to have to market it, right? You're going to have to promote it. You have to share it, right? One of the things that I normally use as a podcaster when you get to the level of being an advanced podcaster is you're able to create podcast album arts or podcast arts or episode arts. I normally use Adobe Express. Adobe Express is a software that is part of Adobe Creative Cloud that I normally use to create a podcast art or an album art. Just like what you see here. This was created through this free web-based software that I use. It's easy to put together. And then once you have put together your album art, you now have to share it on. Let me put it up here. You will want to share it to Instagram and Facebook. And where's my Facebook? There it is. And I use a tool called Rawlio or Later. I use those two software to that website service to share my podcast episodes. And this is what I use. I'm elated to share my podcast to the people that want to listen, because especially on my social media, because I have a following and people follow me. And Facebook and Instagram are your best tools to use for marketing and promoting. Another thing I also want to mention is, besides the marketing and promotional aspect, which is social media and your website, I just want to share that with you. They are your best friend. Social media and website, and even sponsorships. If you can ask for sponsorship to sponsor your show, or sponsorship helps because you can promote the product. In return, they pay you to keep your show, or to pay for your show, and to operate and produce your show. So that's one thing. And the other part I want to share with you is, I do want to share something with you. I did a recent episode not too long ago. And this was my first, this is my 4th season of doing MJDV Travel Podcast. And I want to share with you now what that podcast is. So without further ado, let's go ahead and listen really quick, if I can find it. Go there. So we're gonna get into. I'll go to. Oh, one thing before we listen is you want to share your podcast on this platform. There's platforms that you want to use. There's certain platforms. I would normally recommend Podcasters by Spotify, because they are credible. I've tried many podcast tools, podcast services or hosting services. And when I ran into this about a year or two ago, I never left. I was able to use it. So let's listen to a podcast that I did this season. Obviously, I'll be recording another episode in a few days, but this is one thing I want to share with you, and this is the podcast. So I want you to listen to what I just produced, if I can pull it up. Let me see. If not, we're gonna have to let's share what this podcast is. Here we go.
Hi, everybody. This is Kevin Melchor, and welcome to MJDV Travel Podcast. It's season 4. I cannot believe we're here in season 4, episode 1. It's been 4 seasons of this wonderful podcast show. And thank you for all my supporters and those supporting travel and traveling in the past 4 years with this show starting. And I remember when we first started this was started back during the pandemic, and we are back. And I'm going to make this episode and all the episodes, well, not all the episodes, but an annual episode of CES every year. Of course, I always want to start this first episode, as always, talking about Consumer Electronics Show with Bram Shank. Mm-hmm. And Bram, I would love to do this with you each and every year. as we start with you're pretty much going to be point blank. First episode. Yes.
Oh, the one thing I want to share with you too is the best part about doing a podcast is you don't say a lot of filler words, because that's the beauty part about editing is when you're editing, you can get rid of all your filler words, your pregnant pauses. That's the secret there. Why you when you listen to podcasts and you hear an edited podcast, they get rid of the filler words. So I see April. She's like, so that's one thing. The other thing I want to share with you too, as marketing and promotions, when it comes to, this is also attached to tools, is when it comes to booking guests, I normally suggest using your Google Calendar. Google Calendar is the best because you're able to book your clients, book your interviewees, and automatically you're able to send them an email, send them a calendar invite. And when I did a podcast with Brahm Shank, you just heard, I use Google Calendar. Google Calendar works best when it comes to scheduling and sending your interview questions or your script to whoever you're going to be interviewing. And that's what I normally, you can use Outlook. Outlook is great. And the other thing I failed to mention was when it comes to podcasting, if you're doing an interview, the best tool to use is Zoom. Zoom is a good tool when it comes to doing interviews, because when you're doing virtual interviews, and the reason why I say that is because once the meeting is done, so once the recording is done here for this meeting, it not only exports a video, it also exports into an MP3 audio. You can take that MP3 audio of your interview and you could slice and dice the episode and take that and put it into Adobe Audition. And you're able to improve the audio, improve the sound, improve the dialogue. That's one thing that I want to share with you there is that editing with Audition, producing it through Spotify and Audition at the same time will bring you a awesome podcast that you're wanting to produce. So there's a lot of working parts. It's just a matter of you doing the work to putting together a quality podcast for your listener to enjoy. Because at the end of the day, it's not just about you, it's about the listener. The listener is the one that you're trying to connect with, because that's who you're going to be following. Onward to, so you want to use Google Calendar, you want to use Adobe Audition, you want to use Adobe Express, you want to use Instagram, all forms of social media to better connect with your audience and to put a quality show and to create your brand as a podcaster. Now let's get to the legal part. The legal part of podcasting. And Mark is like, the legal part? Yes, there's legal part of when it comes to podcasting. When you are using music of a podcast, licensed music, that you cannot use that unless you get permission from the copyright holder. So when you're using copyright music, put this in your head. If you're looking to use copyrighted music that is not yours, ask for permission. Write a letter to the copyright holder and say, I want to use this for my podcast. If you're not the best part about using Podcasters by Spotify is they have a library of, that's why I said earlier, they have a library of licensed music, which turns out to be royalty-free music that you can use for your show. However, you have to get approval. But here's the downside to this. Most of the music that you hear that you're going to use either in transitions or during your show or the episodes that you do, it stays with Spotify. You cannot export the audio music to Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts because that becomes illegal to do. That becomes a copyright infringement. Spotify made a deal with the music creators to use licensed music to become license-free music by using. So that you're pretty much staying within the confines of Spotify, of your distribution. So it's almost like you're contracted or being a member with Spotify as your content distributor, as well as your place to do your podcast. It's the same deal when you're getting licensed or contracted with Sirius XM or I always forget the other radio part. So there you go. So that's the one thing I want to bring the nugget to you. Get a podcast talent agent. I want to express this by saying get a podcast talent agent. Sorry, because if let's say you get all big and snap and stuffy and famous beyond belief, like LeVar Burton, Joe Rogan, Oprah Winfrey, they have an agent and a manager. They have a team. But if you're looking to put your name out there and get the better contracts and go from Spotify and go to Sirius XM, get a podcast talent agent. I cannot stress that enough because I've been approached by many people on LinkedIn and saying, "Do you need a podcast talent agent? We saw your work. We saw that you're a podcaster. Do you want a podcast talent agent?" Well, that's a good. You also want to vet the legitimate ones, and that's why podcast talent agents such as William Morris and Endeavor is one of them. Is a credible talent agency here in Los Angeles. Another one I also want to make podcasting a career. There's a lot of people that actually do make money as a podcaster, and they're writers as well as a podcaster, so they do make money. Right now, as you're hearing and seeing, the writers are on strike right now, and podcasts will still keep on going. However, the host has to do more work. So with that being said, you can still make it a career as a podcaster. And register and protect your work in you're writing at the Writers Guild of America. Register your work, protect your work, protect your show. Just by registering your property can actually make you more credible. Tips to create a podcast. I'm going to string through this because my time is running out. Create a community and know your audience. Number 2, invest in podcast equipment and services. Research and script. 4, commit and stay consistent. And 5, have fun and be genuinely you. The best podcast shows I've ever listened to, I've always listened to podcasters that have been genuinely them. And they love having fun. They always joke around. It's always informative. And they're talking to me. That's how they engage with you. And I do have a podcast announcement as I end here. I'll be releasing a second podcast show, but it's not going to be on Podcasters. It's going to be on AMP, And it's going to be authorized. It's going to be known as the Authorized Disney Specialist Podcast. It's everything that is all about Disney. And I'm looking forward to that's going to be launching soon. That's going to be launching later this, I would say either this summer or in this fall. So I'm really excited about that. And lastly, go out and create a podcast. Seriously, go out and create a podcast. I'm elated. I hope this time gave you this 40 minutes of my time was able to, you have the understanding of what it takes or what it means to be a podcaster and how to create a podcast. And I look forward to your questions. With that being said, thank you.